for scoring our tiered fidelity inventory, a 2 by Carrie is based on the same information and credibility as a 2 from Jeremy in IU21. And every year, the Center for Effective Schools does our recalibration. It used to be set recalibration, school-wide evaluation tool back in the day, and then we moved to the TFI, the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. So in true network fashion, the Center for Effective Schools is going to be doing this training for us, and our lead trainer is Rachel Eisenberg. Everyone, give her a round of applause. She has worked her butt off to get this training put together. And Lisa Thomas, who is now the director for the Center for Effective Schools.
And thank you, Becky, and Lisa Thomas, and also Amanda Lanny. Thank you all for your support in putting this together. So I am very excited to be talking about the TFI this morning, and I'm hoping that some of our interactive opportunities will help to bring the energy to this session this morning. So thank you all for joining us. Everyone that I've mentioned, that our agenda for today is first to talk about the purpose of the TFI. Many of you are probably familiar with that, so we're not going to spend a great deal of time on that, but we will talk about the purpose. We'll talk about deadlines and participation requirements for the network. And then we're going to talk about lead evaluator responsibilities when completing the TFI at any tier. Then we'll follow that by spending most of our time talking about responsibilities by separate tier of the TFI. And then we'll end with some updates that PBIS apps will be releasing on December 8th. Don't be nervous. It's not anything earth-shattering, but we will talk about those updates. And then we'll do a little wrap-up. Purpose. So the purpose of the TFI is to evaluate the fidelity of a school's PBIS system at the tier 1, 2, and 3 levels. It's intended to inform the school's implementation of PBIS practices at each of these tiers. It's a simple tool that helps us to make sure that we're accurately using school-wide PBIS, and we use it at all 3 tiers. The TFI scoring guide is one of the tools, well, it's the tool that you use to do the TFI, but it is one of the tools that you're actually going to need to access and use today during a couple of our activities. So it is available on the PBIS apps site at this link, or as Becky shared earlier, it is available in the PaPBS TFI toolkit, which I'm going to share my screen again so you can see. If you clicked on that link that Becky saw, this is the PaPBS site. And if you log in when you're in facilitators meetings, you will be able to find the tiered fidelity inventory section. If you click on the TFI toolbox with index, you will see this document pop up, and then the document that you are looking for is in the links off to the side, the school-wide PBIS tiered fidelity inventory. So that will take you to, I'll let you all navigate there so you have it up for later. There are also TFI facilitator guides and other videos for how to administer the TFI available on the PBIS apps site at this link here. We're not going to be using this link today, so we don't have it right now to put in the chat. I don't want to confuse anybody, but it is here as a resource to you on the PBIS apps site. You can even use their search bar. Just go to PBIS apps, search, and you'll find TFI resources on videos of how to administer, and also training slide decks that have some additional email or additional information. So what is fidelity all about? It's the tiered fidelity inventory. Why are we evaluating fidelity? What's the point of all of it? So school-wide PBIS is an evidence-based framework that addresses student, family, and educator needs, but it only does that when it's implemented accurately. So the idea is that TFI needs to be implemented with accuracy, and then that provides the checks and the supports for tier 1 to 3 implementation with accuracy. So if we don't do the TFI accurately, we can't know that tiers 1 to 3 are being done accurately. And if that's not being done accurately, are the outcomes for the students and the staff really happy? Right? That's the purpose of the TFI. If you have any questions about that, I feel like all of you are probably very familiar with that, but I wanted to make sure we hit that home, that we need to make sure we are assessing fidelity, because that gets to the accuracy of the implementation of PBIS. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can address them. For now, we will move on to the deadlines and participation requirements for the network. So when do you need to complete the TFI this year? So what needs to be done? Who needs to complete a TFI? You have to complete the TFI this year if you are applying for tier 1 recognition, whether initial or sustaining, and if you're assessing tier 2 or tier 3 and applying for recognition for tier 2 or tier 3, you may complete the BOQ or the TIC if you're applying for participation at tier 1 only. So if all you want to do is say that you're a participant in the network and you're working toward trying to implement PBIS and you're at that participation level application this year, you may complete the BOQ or the TIC. Otherwise, if you want any level of recognition, initial, sustaining at tier 1 or advanced tiers, you must complete the TFI. Is there anything else, Tina or Becky or Amanda or Lisa, that you want to add here?
The only thing I would add is if you get confused, go back to the flow chart that we've shared as a PDF and the simulator where you can ask your questions in there to see, it tells you very clearly what's required.
Thank you, Tina. Yes, and the flow chart is on that same page with that TFI toolkit. So
it's a one-stop shop, right, Beck?
All there for you. We're going to keep referencing that today. Everything is in there. All right, so let's get into our PTRAC submission requirements then. So we have to complete the TFI if you're going for recognition. So where do you submit it? So you, first of all, things that were due on Wednesday, just as a reminder, the annual data from last year were due Wednesday in annual data, and the action plan that you developed for the current year was due on Wednesday as well, and that was to be uploaded into the recognition tab in place of the narrative there. And hopefully this will be a helpful tool. You had this last year, hopefully that helped for this year, and now you have it here. Hopefully that will help for next year's submission.
Can I just say something, Rachel?
Yes, go ahead.
Just so that you remember, this annual data is not this year's annual data, it's last year's 2021. So it would have been closing the books of June 30th, 2021. So September, October, November, December, we thought that was a reasonable date. Most of you, I would say, right, Ron, about 90% of you were able to get it in on time. As always, just email up, and Ron sent out a message to this effect just recently. Just let us know if there's an issue with getting your data in, and we will support you. And the action plan did replace the narrative. And the action plan should not be something new just for this. It should be the action plan you used last year as part of your participation status. So it's really just updating it for this year.
Thank you, Tina. Okay. Then your TFI for this school year that you will be doing sometime this winter or spring will be due on June 30th, which is something you all knew from the surveys and the requirements, the network requirements that have gone out. So that will be due June 30th, and that is for this year, and it will be submitted through the assessments tab in PTRAC. To submit a TFI, you will click on add in the upper right corner of the assessment screen, and then this pop-up will appear. You'll have the option to add an assessment, and you'll select TFI from the dropdown. Then you'll select this school year from the dropdown and then click save. Then you will see the TFI added to the assessment list on the main assessment screen, and you'll click on this assessment to add details. Within the assessment, you'll enter the scores for the TFI at tier 1. And if you're conducting the TFI for tiers 2 and 3, you will also enter those scores as well. You'll enter the date that the survey was done. Enter the date that the survey was done, and then select the status of the assessment. Did the school pass or fail? And then you'll click save. This is just the TFI items. The walkthrough is scored in a separate location. To the question about the passing score for the BOQ and for the TFI, a 70% counts as a pass. So that's your pass-fail indicator. And then I see a question also, if you only have tier 1 of the TFI because you're not ready to apply for recognition for tier 2 or tier 3, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong on the back end on PTRAC, Tina, but you can leave that blank for tier 2 and tier 3. Just don't put anything if you don't have anything. You don't, it's not, you're not required to fill that in. You can leave that blank. There's also a question in the chat about, are we completing walkthroughs this year? So the TFI requires you to complete a walkthrough for certain items to be scored, as you likely know. So yes, walkthroughs are required this year. We're going to get into more detail about the walkthroughs and some options for you, but walkthroughs will be submitted in the documents tab. So the assessments tab is where you submit the scores themselves for the TFI for tier 1, and if you need it, tier 2, and then also if you need it, tier 3. The walkthrough itself goes into documents. So you'll select upload in documents, And you'll see this pop up here, and you'll upload your walkthrough score Excel file, which is in your TFI toolkit. In the document type dropdown, you will select walkthrough. This is your TFI Excel file that you'll be uploading. And this is here to help you score the walkthrough items. So in previous years, a separate walkthrough evaluator completed the tool, sent it to you for your schools. Last year, we realized you couldn't have a separate person go in and do this. So you did it for your own schools if you were able to do a walk. This year, you can do a walkthrough. You or a designee that you determine will be completing the walkthrough for your school. So someone needs to complete the walk tool. This Excel tool will still be there to help you or the other person who's completing the walkthrough to summarize your scores for the walkthrough, and it will be submitted in that Documents tab in PTrack. We'll get back to the way that this tool is also helpful to make sure that you're scoring the interview items on the walkthrough accurately. But this is the document that you will upload to the Documents tab. Select the Recognition tab to submit for recognition for this year. So you'll select the recognition type for this year. All recognition types are available. You see here, this is participant. This was from last year, but it's still here this year, as you know. Participant is still an option, as well as initial recognition and sustaining recognition type. You will need to indicate whether the participation rate was met for the SAS when you submit for recognition. So I think this relates to some of the questions that we were just talking about, but yes, you will need to say whether or not the 80% participation rate was met on the SAS when you submit for recognition. And then you will need to indicate this when you go for recognition again, make sure the year is there, list your status, say whether or not you met 80% participation rate on the SAS, which again informs the staff opinions of what's going on and the staff perceptions, which informs how you score the TFI. And then whether or not you completed the walkthrough, which again is required this year. And then you will be able to submit. You'll also need to indicate again, that you submitted your annual data this year, which is what happened 2 days ago. If you are only applying for participation status at Tier 1, because you're only looking for participation, not recognition, and you choose a tool that doesn't require a walkthrough like the BOQ, you can select NA for the walkthrough completed. But if you are going for anything other than participant, you cannot say NA for the walkthrough this year. All right, that is our conclusion of PTrack requirements, submission requirements. So now we're going to talk about lead evaluator responsibilities, and this is across any tier of TFI administration. So this applies whether you're doing all 3 tiers or just Tier 1. So the first thing, which is similar to other years, is that we have the TFI scheduling email. If you are just applying for participation, you do not need a walkthrough if you use the BOQ. If you are just applying for participation and you use the TFI, you do need to do a walkthrough. So that might impact what assessment you pick. But if you do the TFI at all, even if it is just for participation, you do need a walkthrough because you can't effectively score, or going back to our term accuracy, our theme for the day, if you don't accurately score the TFI, you're not going to know whether things are happening, and you need the walkthrough to accurately score the TFI. I will say that again. If you are doing the TFI for whatever purpose, if you do the TFI for participation, if you do it for recognition, you need to do a walk. TFI equals walk, one and the same. You need to do the walkthrough if you're doing the TFI, even if it's for participation. If you're just going for participation, do the BOQ or the TIC. Then you don't need to do a walkthrough. Those assessments don't require walkthroughs to be able to accurately do the assessment. Don't want to do the TFI scheduling emails are available in your TFI toolkit. There are various versions of this email. So select the one that's most appropriate to you. Implementing Tier 1, which would apply, I guess, if you're using the TFI for participation status as well, you could use the implementing Tier 1 email for scheduling. Then there's sustaining Tier 1, and then sustaining Tier 1, and then Tier 2 you can read. Just remember to update the highlighted sections of the email. There are yellow highlighted pieces. Make sure you update that before you send your email. Implementing Tier 1 is your first year of implementation of Tier 1. Sustaining is you implemented it last year, you were recognized, and this year you're looking to sustain it, but you're not looking to. So that's just plain sustaining Tier 1. You can sustain Tier 1 alone, or you can sustain Tier 1 and add on the initial year of implementation of Tier 2. This is a sample email content. Again, the yellow highlights, with the exception of this top piece, which is the header that you're probably not going to include in your email. All the other highlights are things that you need to change before you send the email. And then to the right, you'll see the matching data sources list. Make sure that you attach that with your email, because the schools will need to know what data sources they need to use to be able to refer to during. Then you also have in your TFI toolkit which was just added to the chat, so you can access that link. The TFI evaluator responsibilities. So you'll select the version that's most appropriate for what you are applying for. So this is a sample of the tiers 1, 2, and 3 evaluator responsibilities. These are just the first 3 pages. There are a lot of details in here, but the reason why it is lengthy is because it's supposed to support you in making sure you know every single step of the way what you need to be doing. Recommend that you send that email. I see a question in the chat. Are you required to send this email, or can you compile your own? We strongly recommend that you send the emails that we drafted, because they were very thoughtfully put together about certain expectations and requirements. So please use those scheduling emails. It's there to make your life easier. If there are some things you need to adapt, you can, or like if you want to like make it a welcome addition to it, you may do that. Please use the emails as they're written, because there are a lot of details in there that were thoughtfully put in so that it would be clear what the expectations are for the team. I'm glad that some of you think they're a good resource. Tips for all tiers. Again, these are things that you will need to do regardless of what tier of the TFI you are implementing. So first of all, make sure that you're engaging the team to keep everyone active. So consider thinking about meeting roles. You often have meeting roles. Those of you who are using tips, people on the meeting have different roles and different ways to engage during the meeting. If you can do that during the TFI itself, that helps to keep everyone participating. Especially important to consider as roles are the self-assessment survey and artifact or product reporters. Those are both very important components to scoring the TFI, but they're often overlooked. So if you have someone in that role to say, I'm here to make sure that I know we're talking about the SAS data when we're thinking about our scoring, that makes it more intentional. You might also think about sending the questions ahead of time to the team members so that they're prepared for the discussion. If they have a chance to review it ahead of time, it can make everything move a little more quickly and more efficiently. However, I say that with the caveat that sending the questions ahead of time, sending the survey ahead of time is not an opportunity for the team members to complete it independently and come with their scores and treat it like a survey that they're all just completing separately and then they submit their scores. That is not the purpose. You may have them look at it ahead of time so that they're aware of what the questions are and it takes less time to read everything and think it through, but you need to score it all together. Remote administration is still an option this year for the TFI. So if you need to meet with your team, if you are meeting with your teams remotely and you need to do the TFI remotely through Teams or Zoom or whatever platform, that's okay. Base your needs off of the school's visitor policies. You may be thinking, but what about the TFI or the walkthrough? We're going to get to that. Don't panic about the walkthrough yet. You complete the TFI remotely with the team. Just make sure you're displaying the TFI items on the shared screen with the scoring rules so that everyone can see everything together. You can have staff hold fingers to rate. You can still see everybody's screen. Last year during this training, we used some stamp features, which I actually used during some TFI administrations, which was very effective. So everyone can kind of stamp where they think their score is. You can use some different engagement opportunities. All right, so we are going to watch a clip of the TFI, and this is the beginning of a TFI, a clip of the beginning of a TFI. This happens to be a tier 1 TFI, but the pre-meeting work can apply for any team meeting.
The tier 1 team is gathered together to complete the TFI. No one is missing today. Every team member is here and ready to take the survey. Watch how the meeting begins. Notice all the ways they've prepared ahead of time to make the meeting more efficient.
Okay, we're all here for our meeting, so let's go and get started, everybody. This afternoon, we're taking the TFI for just the Tier 1 sections. Does everyone have a copy of their TFI walkthrough results? Awesome. I have extras if you need them, so just let me know. The last meeting, you'll remember, we talked about reviewing that survey on our own and then coming to this one with our own ideas for our responses.
This pre-meeting work makes it so everyone has plenty of time to check the documentation or clarify whatever they need to know to get their answer. This meeting helps us stay focused on our scores and talking through disagreements rather than asking clarifying questions.
Anyone need an extra copy before we move on? Okay. Coach, did you have anything to add before we get started?
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. I was just going to remind everybody, we've done this before. We did last year in the fall, and I just want to remind everybody about the process. We'll take turns reading the item, read it all the way through, and then we'll count 1, 2, 3, and then on 3 we'll raise the score that we came to an agreement on, or that we decided on before we came to this meeting. If we all agree on the same, all get the same number, then we'll move on to the next item. But if we're all over the place, if we have 0s or 2s and ones over. We'll take some time to discuss the item, and then we'll come to a decision on what that score should be for that item.
The team has a process for voting. The way you do this with your team might look different. No matter what you do, be sure this is a group discussion. Don't complete the scoring individually and turn them into someone after. Put the work in up front, then get together and talk about it as a team.
Okay, everybody understand?
Yes.
All right, remember, we're not doing action planning today. We'll save that for the next meeting. We'll take our scores and use the scores that we get to guide our action planning later.
Sounds good.
Okay. Now, will we be able to review the reports before we meet to do our action planning?
That's a good question, Rhonda. So we are going to enter the scores online during this meeting, and we can watch it happen right up there on the screen. And I set everyone up to access their report, so you can do that anytime after we're finished here today. And if you need help or questions about how to do that, let me know and I can help you do that. Okay?
I know you were all very carefully reflecting on all the things that were going on in that pre-meeting. So again, tips for all tiers, things that you just providing evidence for the TFI score. That was a great segue. You need to see the actual products to help with scoring each item. You can't take the school's word for it. You need to see the actual implementation of the item and the proof in the product in order to give the school credit for the item. You as a facilitator must be an active participant in the TFI. It's not just a team-driven process. You are there as an active member of that team. You must complete the TFI live with the team and ask questions, answer questions. Again, use actual products to question teams when necessary. So if they say that something is happening and they share school-wide data with staff, but you don't see an actual product of what sharing the school-wide data with staff looks like, then ask probing questions. Don't just take the team's word for it. Let the data and let the products guide the conversation and hold the team accountable. So it's not being nice to let the team score higher than they should score, because then they think they're implementing PBIS and they think they're doing it well when they really aren't. Be fair and be nice by holding the team accountable, by questioning them as needed, and again, referring back to the products and the data. So make sure you're being fair by holding them accountable to implementing or to the items on the TFI, which will make sure that they're being accurate in their implementation of PBIS. Remember that just,
do you mind if I just add something here? And remember, that's the whole point of this recalibration thing, is to say when Jeremy scores, Crystal is scoring with the same level of understanding of the tool. And this is where sometimes it does get difficult to separate yourself from your team, and you've done so much work with your team. That's where that SAS, the self-assessment survey, can really be there to support you. And this is how we maintain the credibility of this network. I know a few years ago, we had a conversation about that people were getting high scores on BOQs and they weren't really doing it. That's what we count on all of you to maintain that level of integrity, so that we are getting accurate scores as best as you can. And again, we offer the patent support. If you need us to go in there and support you with that and be that outside person, please tap into us. Each office is ready to support with this process. So
that's the whole point, that you're here to make sure that you're doing things accurately. And the goal is to talk through each tier. As I said, we're going to get into each tier so that you're comfortable with the items and that you know what you're doing when you go in and try to hold teams accountable, or do hold teams accountable for scoring on these items. All right, we are going to get back to our video. We're going to watch another 2.5 minutes or so. And again, reflect on what you're seeing, think about what's working and how you might apply that.
Okay, so should we get started? I think we're all logged in, ready. So you'll see up on the board the TFI, and like Bert said, we'll read the item and then count to 3 like this. 1, 2, 3, vote. Everyone will hold up the score in their hands just like we did last fall. All right, so the first item we're looking at here is team composition. Let's take a minute, look over how you scored that question. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, vote. Well, that's pretty clear. We're in agreement. We all gave it 2s. I agree, a 2 on that. And I'm proud of us. We worked really hard this year to be sure everyone has representation in our building. And big kudos to Megan here for your work representing our families in the building. Thank you. Sure. Awesome.
And that Tristan is a student.
Yes, we've also got a student on board this year. That's wonderful, Kat, your voice.
In this next section, the team keeps moving through the survey one item at a time. The team lead guides them through discussion as needed, keeping everything moving as efficiently as possible. Notice how the TFI walkthrough comes into play and what happens when there's a split vote. Okay, so the second item is the team operating procedures. Okay, so are you ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3, vote. Okay, I see a lot of ones. Jessica, tell us more about your vote.
I voted a 2 because I thought we had an action plan, don't we? That's why I gave it a 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have one, but have we looked at it recently?
Yeah, we have an action plan, but it's pretty old. I don't think we've looked at it since September. So we've been working through it, but we really haven't updated it throughout the year.
Notice how the discussion focuses on the minor nuance to the question and describing why that matters in the context for this team.
Well, that's true. I mean, I'm okay with the 1. I'm okay with the 1 for that item.
Yeah, I think it should be one.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So let's enter a 1.
Great. All right, so my turn next then? Okay, behavioral expectations. So looking at the TFI walkthrough, it says that 95% of our staff knew at least 2 of the expectations. So are we ready to vote on that one? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. 1, 2, 3, vote. Oh, we're in agreement, all 2. That was easy.
Okay, so the next item is the problem behavior definitions. Are we all ready to vote on that? Mm-hmm. Okay. 1, 2, 3, vote. Ooh, so we're kind of split on that.
I mean, we developed these, we worked on these, right? They're in our handbook. We trained everyone on it. I mean, shouldn't that be a 2?
Yeah, I never saw them though. So did they get shared with families? Because it says right here that in order to score a 2, that the definitions have to be shared with families too.
Yeah, so our definitions are documented. We included them in the staff handbook and trained all the staff members. I'm wondering if we forgot about the family handbook. I actually have it right here. I'm looking, but I don't see them. We might have forgotten about putting them in the family handbook.
May I take a look?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Yep, they're not in here, huh? Okay.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do a revote. Okay, 1, 2, 3, vote. All right, we're all at a 1, so I'll go ahead and enter a 1.
So that was a little bit more than 2.5 minutes. I apologize. I think I stopped it a little bit early last time, but thank you for your patience in the slight change compared to the expectations there. So thank you for that. Now we're going to do the same thing in the chat on what do the coach and the facilitator do to help resolve conflicts in scoring? What did you notice? Discuss briefly and revote. Review the artifacts. Have them in front of you. Look for that proof. Go back to the documents, the actual product. Perfect. What is one thing that makes the meeting run efficiently? Which we may have gotten to some of these things, but what's one other thing that helped the meeting run efficiently that you saw in live time in the video? Everything ready and present, right? You didn't have, where's this document? Everything was ready. 1, 2, 3, vote, clear roles. There was a question about what to do if you can't get the team all in one room because there are concerns about COVID or there are different policies this year in place. As I said earlier, you can do the meeting virtually. You could do a meeting just like this via Zoom, just make sure everyone's sharing their camera and you can have different participation options for scoring and you can share screens, to share product when necessary to pull up the product here and say, hey, well, I have it right here. Let me show it on the screen. And otherwise you can be sharing the TFI scores and items. All right, so we're going to move into responsibilities by tier. Again, if you have any question about if someone gets pulled from meetings, especially the administrator, administrators do get pulled from meetings. That's why when we do tips, we don't recommend that you have an administrator be the facilitator. Does the administrator need to be there for the TFI? Is that expected? Yes. If the administrator gets pulled out for like a quick call or something's going on, that's okay. You can continue going with the TFI. Administrators get pulled. If you're starting the TFI and the administrator's like, I can't be here now, there's this other crazy thing going on, my recommendation would be reschedule the TFI at that time because the administrator should be there for some of that TFI. But if they get pulled for something during the meeting and then come back, that's okay. You don't have to it's not a hard stop if the administrator leaves the room. If they come back in 10 to 15 minutes. That's okay. All right. Responsibilities by tier. Right, walkthrough is required. I've said this before, but this is the moment. Here we are. Walkthrough is certainly required. Who completes the walkthrough? Ideally, someone in your region, someone else who's not the facilitator for your school. That's ideal. Are we living in an ideal world right now? Is this a normal school year? No, and we recognize that. So there is the option, again, similar to last year, for some flexibility this year. So you may complete the walkthroughs in the schools you facilitate. Again, not ideal, but it's an option. If you want to find someone else in your region because you know you're not the best evaluator for that school because something with the relationships with them, you know it might be better just to have somebody else go in and do the interviews with the teachers and the students, fine. I'm not suggesting you have a bad relationship. I'm suggesting maybe it just, if you think it's easier to have someone go in and do that observation or the interviews for you, that's fine. You will need to assign your own local person. The network is not assigning anyone to you, but you can reach out to your local patent regional representative if you need support in identifying someone, but that is on you to schedule and coordinate. Remember to capture a cross-representation of staff and students. You can conduct the walkthrough virtually if you need to. So there were some questions in the chat. This is a different year. What do I do? How do I get in? How do I do a walkthrough? You can do it in person or you can do it virtually. We're going to get into virtual options in a minute. Be aware of the school's visitor policies, basically. It's not a set. You don't need to be in the lunchroom. In fact, we don't even recommend being in the lunchroom. You don't even need to see posters on the wall. It's not a set. It's not a set observation. This is essentially just interviews. So be aware of visitor policies. If you want to be able to be there in person, which we certainly recommend, be creative in your timing. So again, always interview during non-instructional time, but think creatively. Becky, you gave some great options for interviewing before and after school. You don't even have to be in the building. You can interview at recess and kind of hang out with permission, of course, at a certain spot in the recess area and on the playground and do interviews there for staff and for students. You do not need to be in the building to do an in-person walk. If you need any tips or help with scheduling the walkthrough, these are just some suggestions or ideas. You probably have your own favorite tools for scheduling, but these are just some sample scheduling tools you can use to facilitate scheduling interviews. Doodle, the one I'll highlight here is, you may be familiar with Doodle. If you have a Doodle premium account or if you use the 14-day free trial, there's a Doodle hidden so that it's basically like any other Doodle, but people can't see other people's responses. So if you want to hide one person's response from another, you can use Doodle hidden. I personally haven't used it, but it sounds like a great feature, but it is part of the premium account. When you do your walkthrough, tips if you're doing this remotely. So if you say, I can't even go to the school to be there at entry. Oh, thank you, Becky. I didn't know Doodle hidden works on the free account. Doodle didn't tell me that when I was there. A few days ago, but thank you. That's a really good tip. Select a random sample of students and teachers. If you decide you can't be there in person, select a random sample anyway. But if you decide you can't be there in person, some tips for doing it remotely are to make sure you select a random sample, have the school administrator help you select students and teachers, and also select more than you need to accommodate for any kind of cancellations or no-shows. Identify an interview schedule that's agreeable with the administrator. Make sure you're doing this during non-instructional time. And also, if you are doing the walkthrough remotely, or even if you're doing the walkthrough on the playground or entry, arrival, dismissal time outside, make sure you're asking if there's any kind of student hybrid learning situation. Make sure you're asking about any differences in expectations that might be happening because of remote learning or remote acknowledgements that might be going on. So make sure you're asking about those remote expectations and acknowledgements if there's any kind of variation in the typical acknowledgements and expectations for the school. And if you're doing a virtual walkthrough, make sure you're using the school's video conferencing platform and have the school schedule the meeting, because that will reduce any kind of security issues. Just use what the school has already approved for themselves. Additional tips for conducting the walkthrough: make sure you complete the tool in advance. Your interviews will be much more efficient and go much more smoothly if you know the expectations and the acknowledgement system in advance. Make sure you're prepared with that. Also, remember, when you score the walkthrough, only 90% of the staff need to know only 67% of the expectations, not 100% of the expectations. So know what 67% equates to for your school's expectations. Prepare your form with that. So if you know 67% of the expectations is 2 out of 3 or 4 out of 5, know that, so that you know when you're going in to do the interview that they don't need to know 5 out of 5, they only need to know 4 out of 5. And the same thing goes for students as well. These are items 1.3 and 1.4 on the TFI. For 1.4, 70% of the students need to know at least 67% of the expectations. So make sure you have your walkthrough tool prepared with this, but also make sure you have your Excel scoring spreadsheet prepared with this in advance to help you avoid scoring errors. Go back to our video, and we are going to wrap up the video and take a look at the rest of that Tier 1 meeting when there are questions about what an item.
In this last part of the meeting, some team members need more information before they cast their votes. Watch how others chime in to give everyone the background they need in order to feel confident about the score.
So on to classroom procedures. Folks ready to vote?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. 1, 2, 3, vote. Ooh. So I see a couple folks didn't vote. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I actually didn't know how to answer this question. So.
Totally. They teach us about PBS in class, but I actually have no idea what a formal system is.
Well, so in our staff handbook, we actually have a whole section related to classroom systems, and it's got a teaching schedule in there. So when I do walkthroughs on a daily basis, teachers are actually doing the teaching expectations and using those minutes to teach the expectations regularly.
Okay, gotcha. I could give that a 2.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Okay. So our consensus vote is 2.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so the last item is the annual evaluation.
Before we vote, did anyone else not understand this one?
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask for clarification before voting. If you aren't sure what something is, ask around. It could be there's more than one person in the room with the same question.
This question tripped us up a lot in the fall too. We scored a 0 back then. It just seems complicated.
So the annual evaluation is a short document, should be 1 to 2, 3 pages long, that's shared with everybody, staff and students and family, the board, and we can get out. It would look something like this, where we have information that would be shared about our current TFI scores, how we're doing in attendance and some things like that, and our plans, our action plan for what we're doing about where we are right now. We don't have it as something that we could have.
Yeah, I think we have all this. We just haven't shared it.
Totally. I know we've never seen it as in our parent group. We've never seen something like this, but I think it's something we could definitely do in our next newsletter.
I really like the sound of that. Does anybody want to do a small group to focus on that?
That's a great idea.
Yeah, Cody,
And
maybe
maybe
you have access to some of that.
Well,
data.
and Megan, you also
All right,
have ideas.
yeah, that's a great idea. I think we should do that, but let's bring us back and maybe bring those up in the action planning meeting and save it for that. I can add it to the notes and we can talk about it then.
Okay.
It's so easy to start thinking about ideas for improving your systems. As you go through the TFI, chances are you'll find yourself wandering down those paths. Do your best to recognize when that happens and remind yourselves of the purpose of the meeting. This team agreed to complete their action planning after taking the TFI. The team lead is good to gently remind the group of their agreement, keep the idea for the upcoming meeting, and redirect everyone back to their original task.
Does everyone feel like they're ready to vote on this item?
Yeah.
Forgot I had muted myself, and then my mouse was slow in getting to unmute myself. So that's the end of where they stop for the meeting. So that there's a summary at the end. Again, the link is in the chat if you want to see the video of that TFI administration. You can always take a look at the wrap up there, but that's where they stop that meeting view. So I'm sure you were reflecting on what you were seeing. So let's answer this question now. So what can you do as a coach if you're not sure that the team understands an item? Ask what they think it means. Like, can you explain it to me? Because this can get tricky sometimes. I'm not sure all team members are always like, I didn't know what this means. Sometimes they do, but there might be times where you sit there as a coach and you think, I'm not sure they understand exactly what this item is looking for. Look at the item features. Ask someone else on the team to clarify. That's a great strategy. So it's not all coming from you. Maybe someone else on the team understands it. Part of holding the team accountable. So if someone says they don't understand, good, clarify and have that conversation. If someone seems like they don't understand, make sure you're holding the team accountable to understanding exactly what that item actually means. So this is not actually something that you saw happen in the meeting, but is something I think that it's important to reflect on, because again, holding them accountable is being fair. What you can do is allow the team to look at the items in advance. They can reflect on them. They can be familiar with them. They can even write down, I think I'd score this a 2, but they can't complete it on an electronic survey in advance because the scoring has to be live. If they complete it on an electronic survey in advance, it's a very slippery slope into just having the scores summarized from that survey, and that's the score. So no, you cannot have the team members complete the items on an electronic survey in advance. You have to score it live. I don't know how else to say that. Just make sure you're scoring it live. You can have them look at it in advance. They can look at an electronic copy of it in advance, but don't put it into an electronic survey and have them answer it ahead of time.
They can look at it ahead of time. They can even do everything Rachel said, but the actual survey is completed as a team. Did I get that right, Rachel?
Yeah. Can you do a TFI at tier 1 without a walkthrough? So no, you cannot do a TFI at tier 1 without a walkthrough. There are options for completing the walkthrough. Again, remember, if you want to complete that, or ideally completing that live walkthrough in person, you can do it at recess or before or after school. If you're worried for your own health or whatever's going on, you can stay outside masked or whatever you need to do, but you can still be outside. You do not need to be in the building. If you cannot complete it live in person, you can do it live virtually. So there are a lot of options for you for the TFI walkthrough, but you need to do the walkthrough if you are doing the TFI at tier 1. Again, TFI at tier 1 is required for recognition at any level.
Rachel, just to clarify that when these walkthroughs are being done, it's being done by someone who is trained in TFI. So facilitators are the ones doing the walkthroughs. You don't have other people filling them in and saying, oh, here's our walkthrough data when they come into the meeting.
So the facilitator needs to be doing the TFI. When I said you need to find somebody else, or it's ideal to find somebody else to do the walkthrough, I should have said find another facilitator in your region to do the walkthrough. It's not just any person off the street. It's not somebody from a different school next door. It is another facilitator to do the walkthrough.
And again, if you need help, this is a network. Like we have had permission in past years where local facilitators can cross county lines. I know some of our IUs, like I know the East 22 and 23 and 24 have a lot of facilitators, so you can divvy things up. But if you do need help, remember, reach out to your patent person and we'll support you too.
All right, so does the team have to reach consensus? 94% of you responding say the team does have to reach consensus. 6% of you said no. Those of you who said yes, you are correct. The team does have to reach consensus. Does that mean that if there's one person, maybe those of you who said, like, does everyone have to agree? No, there might be one person who says, I still disagree with that, but I respect everybody's opinion because we're being respectful. It's okay. You can have 1 or 2 people on a team of 10 who say, I'm not sure I agree with that, but the team consensus, 80% of the team members say, this is the score, then great, that's reaching consensus. So yes, guide the team until consensus is reached. And by consensus, I mean like a majority vote and not a whole lot of contention. Hold the team accountable, refer to permanent products as you go. Do I need the SAS before the TFI or any other fidelity tool? Do you need to do the self-assessment survey first? Yes, you do need to do the TFI, need to do the SAS before TFI or BOQ or TIC or whatever fidelity tool you happen to be using. Again, if you are going for recognition, you need the TFI, but yes, you can use, you do need to have the SAS first. So most of you got that one too. That SAS is a self-report tool for the staff as a whole to complete that then informs your scoring for tier 1 on the TFI. All right, we're going to put WooClap aside. Oh, no, we're not. We're going to do it just another quick second for a comprehension or a reflection check. But just as a reminder for tier 1, the summary is you need to complete the walkthrough, prepare that Excel scoring spreadsheet ahead of time to avoid any scoring errors, and hold the team accountable. Questions, ask them questions when you're not sure things are being implemented as they say. All right, we want to hear from you again now that we've gone through some of these tips for tier 1 implementation. How confident do you feel now in completing the TFI at tier 1? Only 27 of you responding so far, but I see there seem to be more respondents at this time saying you feel confident. Those of you who still have questions, you can add them to the chat, or you can reach out to your regional facilitator. If you really feel like you can't do this, again, reach out to your regional facilitator, or feel free to ask questions. Those of you who complete this session.
Right, if you're not comfortable, and there could be some provisional facilitators in here because you were invited from the last 2 days. I get that. This is a lot. You'll work with your mentor, you'll contact your patent office. We are here to support you. And I really would like to get 80 people at least to respond to this. That's 5 more people, because if you think, I did the math, and that's like 70% of the people online right now responding. So I think we need at least 70% of 114 people responding. 2 more. 1 more. 1 more person. So for those folks who feel okay, but you have questions, you have your regional folks, whether that's the East Central or Western region, we've got 80. For the 61 of you who feel confident, go off and do. And those of you who could lead this session, let me know and we'll sign you up with Rachel for next year.
You can take my spot if you'd like. No, kidding. I do love doing this with you, Tina, and team. All right, so we're going to move on to tier 2. Some tips for implementing the TFI, at tier 2. Make sure you gather necessary data sources to help you with scoring before the meeting. The data sources list, again, on that TFI toolkit will help you, but these are just some, that's a more comprehensive list. This is some of the material that will be more prevalent or more supportive to you, or the most supportive materials. Make sure you have, the tier 2 handbook, any kind of needs assessment data, training plans or schedules, tier 1 materials, because you have to reference the tier 2 process being consistent with tier 1. Make sure you have these materials available and ready to go, the data, student outcome data, and progress monitoring information that will help with scoring. So if you have it, and if you can review it before the meeting, then you'll even be able to hold the team more accountable during the meeting. So this is just some helpful tips to have in advance. Know the tier 2 interventions that the school intends to implement. Know what they're actually implementing. Sometimes school years don't go as planned. Sometimes things go awry, and everything might look great on paper, and they might have 3 great outlined interventions of how to implement all these 3 tier 2 interventions that they have, but it's not actually happening. Sometimes that's the case. And so that's okay. Thing can be, right? Like it's things happen. If they're only implementing 1 tier 2 intervention, at least they're doing the one, but know what they're actually doing, because you don't want to score just based on what's on the paper. Yes, always refer to the paper for what they have, but you have to know what they're actually implementing from that paper as well. Think about the interventions that are being implemented. There is a tool at the back of the TFI that will help with scoring some of the items. There's this targeted intervention reference guide and map, which will help you determine whether the interventions the school is implementing are matched to the student need. They go through check and check out and some counseling interventions. That tool is helpful for you. Another tool that's helpful for you is the tier 2 intervention grid, which is again available in your TFI toolkit on the PaPBS apps site. This grid is available to you as something that the teams can fill out for the different interventions. Here is a sample for you. This sample intervention grid walks through check and check out. It has the check and check out intervention, the tier 2 intervention description, what the entry criteria are for the intervention, including some function-based considerations. So what are the data criteria that you'll use to enter a student into the intervention? And also what kind of a student will this intervention support with? So for check and check out, that's helpful for a student motivated by adult attention and students that need to learn self-monitoring skills. Then you'll list the data to monitor fidelity, which could be a point sheet completion or teacher self-ratings of their frequency of the feedback they provide on the point sheet. What data are you going to monitor? Progress for students, and then what are the exit criteria? So maybe after 2 weeks, they do some fewer check-ins and check out. And then maybe after 2 weeks of success with just the more limited check-ins, they graduate from check and check out. So this is an example. This is the kind of tool that you would expect your teams to be completing as they develop their tier 2 intervention processes. So you have to think, is this the type of detail that your schools have for each tier 2 intervention? All right, we're going to go back to WooClap now. And I would like for you to identify the areas of that tier 2 intervention grid that you are least likely to see your schools have in place. So which are the areas that are the most challenging? Again, that WooClap link is again in the chat, and the QR code is available here. It's fun to see the answers come in as you go. We see a lot of the behavior function addressed by the intervention. Sorry, that's a typo. Consideration of behavior function addressed by the intervention. Data to monitor fidelity, that's a tricky one. That's hard for schools to do, but being creative about how to monitor fidelity is always a good thing. Exit criteria also looks like a higher level one, or the third ranked. Let's see if we can get a few more responses. What seems to be the trickiest thing? Fidelity and function addressed by the intervention seem to be the hardest. We're highlighting these because these are elements that are necessary for scoring some of the items on the TFI. So if they don't have function considered in identifying which intervention is appropriate for the students, then they can't earn full points on one of the TFI items. If they don't have data to monitor the fidelity of the interventions as they're implementing the interventions, they can't earn full points. Those are two huge sticking points. And exit criteria looks like it's
this is a really nice way of breaking that down, because part of the reason Rachel's doing this so explicitly is we were asked to do more around the tier 2 process, and these 6 items are so critical, and that's why that intervention grid, which is how we train tier 2 work, but you know, we're much better at our training as a network for tier 1 than our tier 2 and tier 3, but we are improving.
Some tricky areas, and I'm not surprised that these are coming up as some of the more tricky areas. What your job is as the facilitator is to make sure that the teams are filling out these components of how they're going to implement their interventions when they plan their interventions, or going back to revisit an action plan to revise their implementation of interventions. Go back to this intervention grid and have them complete this grid. You want to reformat it, put it in a different look, that's fine. But these elements all need to be considered. All right, so that's what we're seeing as everyone's tricky sticking points. So what do your teams need? What types of supports do your teams need to be able to implement those? For your thoughts on that. And I'm hoping we've addressed some of these things, and add your questions to the chat as you have them. Samples. Again, you have a sample example there. And if you need more samples and examples, you can reach out to other local facilitators in your area. We learn from each other, we support each other. Or if you have needs for other resources, reach out to your regional facilitator, and I'm sure they have resources as well. All right, hold the team accountable during the tier 2 TFI. So make sure that when things require written documentation and products, you're looking at those products. Reference the documented process for training staff in the tier 2 interventions. Make sure the data show the level of use of the tier 2 intervention. Look at student data to look at the progress that they're making. Make sure that you know whether there's a formal process to select interventions based on student need. Again, this follows that function piece. So support them in developing this process to address function for the intervention, but then make sure there's a formal process to use that identification of intervention by function. And then also make sure that all criteria for a 2 are met. For example, this item 2.6 requires that for a score of a 2, all tier 2 interventions include all 3 of the core features identified in the item, which I know is really tiny, and I'm not expecting you to be able to read it all. But all tier 2 interventions need to have all core features to get a 2 here. A score of 1 requires that all of the interventions have some of the core features. If one intervention has none of the core features, that would score a 0. So again, keeping track of what the scoring criteria are and being fair by being accurate. After the tier 2, use the scoring to support the team with action planning. And a summary here of our tier 2 before we jump into tier 3 is just to make sure you're reviewing products ahead of time so you're familiar with everything that the team has. Examine student progress monitoring data, look at staff fidelity data, and hold the team accountable. So quick check, because I want to give you time to tier 3. So we're going to open this with clap up. How confident do you feel completing the TFI at tier 2 this?
Yeah, we are here, and we can pull together like a group of us. You know, this could be targeted supports. We can pull together a group of us to talk about this and set something up. And remember, each of the patent offices is offering office hours. So if you want to go to an office hour and talk about this, we're there for you.
Can some of the samples for the intervention tool be uploaded within the TFI toolkit? Now we're going to get into tier 3. So again, I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. This was just how confident are you at tier 3? I'm hoping that if you're not quite confident, you'll feel a little more confident within the next 23 minutes. So preparing for the tier 3 TFI. Most of the items are scored based on the tier 3 support plan worksheet, which is the rubric that's at the back of the TFI. It's the last page of the TFI scoring guide. Complete that worksheet before the TFI. If you're doing it during the TFI meeting, it's going to take a ton of time. So what you'll need to do is you request the 3 behavior support plans in advance. The rubric requires you look at 3 behavior support plans from the last 12 months. So request them of the school in advance, score that worksheet in advance, and bring it to the meeting. You score it in advance, and then prepare the team for the meeting. So send the tier 3 support plan worksheet to the team, say, here's what I saw when I reviewed the behavior support plans. Have a team member share the 3 behavior support plans with the rest of the team. You can de-identify them or have the team member de-identify them. But that way that you and the team have the worksheet rubric scored ahead of time, and you have the 3 behavior support plans available as a reference point and resource. Questions about filling out this rubric. What if not all the elements of the behavior support plans are not easy to locate and you're filling out this rubric and you're like, I don't know where all these materials are. Sometimes the information that you're looking for is there, but not in the most obvious location. So for example, parent input might be hidden in present levels of the IEP. Parent input should also include quality of life indicators. Those are some of the things the rubric will ask you to look for. So just be mindful that it might not be in the most obvious location. If the information is really just not in that behavior plan anywhere, request that information separately. It's okay to request that of the school specifically. If the school doesn't have any of that information, then when you have the TFI meeting, you're going to have to prompt the team, you need that. The behavior support plan, they are IEP support plans. No, wait, Becky, go ahead. You
In the TFI, it does not state that, Crystal, but it has to be one or the other. There have been schools that have utilized in their framework and their process, and they have used that. There are some downfalls to some of the things that if we do behavior support plans from special education, because they won't have all of the pieces. They'll be in all different places. But for the most part, I try to get behavior plans that come from the tier 3 problem solving team that are not special education, but you are going to get into situations where sometimes they do. Sometimes there are districts that automatically, if you're getting an FBA, that's considered an assessment because it's a local education agency decision. And that's where you might be in a situation where students who have gotten an FBA or even a simple FBA might have put that on IEP forms. So there's nothing in TFI that says it can't be, but you're just going to have to make sure that based upon the local LEA local decision, that it does have all the pieces. Does that help?
Okay, so this is what the tier 3 support plan worksheet looks like. This is the top part of it. This is at the end of the TFI scoring worksheet or TFI scoring rubric guide. And you'll have a place to access that in just a moment. Majority of the scoring, again, is determined based on the review of this tier 3 support plan worksheet. For during the tier 3 TFI is to use the de-identified plans during the meeting as a teaching tool. So you can say, here's where I found this. This is what you have, or this is what you don't have, and you weren't able to give it to me separately. So make sure you do put it in moving forward and you action plan for that after the TFI. As I'm going to go through these questions, these things that might be challenging to locate, questions you may have there, or other questions about how to score items that your groups have listed here. And we will respond to them and post them in a new section on the Padlet, and then we will resend this Padlet link to everybody so that all of you here and anyone watching this recording will have access to the questions and will have access to some of the responses to these questions, again, because I know we're short on time. In fact, I'm not sure I'm going to get to any of the questions right now because we have a few other things. After the TFI, again, I realize that there are questions you may have about scoring some of the things. We will get to that. After you score the Tier 3 TFI share feedback on how to put together these behavior plans with the school, and make sure the school, that your team, is sharing this with any relevant external providers who are doing their behavior plans. Because if the behavior plans aren't put together well, sometimes it relies on those external providers knowing what needs to happen for the school to have effective plans in place. And then, of course, as always, help the team to action plan to make sure that any Tier 3 operational plan development or plan implementation features are in place. Another quick tip is that even if you're not completing Tier 3 of the TFI, and I did see that scrolling through some of your questions, that if you're in one of your groups, no one was doing Tier 3 with your schools, that's okay. You can still refer to this if you would like as a resource. You can use this Tier 3 support plan worksheet or this rubric to help improve behavior plan practice, because whether or not you're doing Tier 3 at Fidelity for Recognition, excuse me, you don't necessarily, or you still may have good behavior plans in place. You will need good behavior plans in place. So you can use this worksheet to guide that behavior plan development and implementation. So quick summary for Tier 3, we're going to prepare ahead of time, share the Tier 3 support plan worksheet in advance of the meeting, and use the meeting time as a teaching opportunity that then you can action plan from after. Quick updates to PBIS apps. Don't be nervous, but PBIS apps has some updates coming on December 8th at the big. So it's all to PBIS assessments is the update that they're making. So at the beginning of the PBIS apps, PBIS assessments survey for the TFI, you're going now to be asked to indicate which tiers are being assessed at this time. So you either select Tier 1, Tiers 1 and 2, or Tiers 1, 2, and 3. All responses are required. You can't leave any blank now on PBIS assessments. They did that because even if a response is blank, you don't know the answer. If it's there and it's a 0, okay, action plan around it, but you have to put an answer in. There were 3 questions at the end of the survey that asked about whether students are successful in academics and behavior. Those questions are going to be gone now. The key thing for you to know is that if you have an open TFI assessment window in PBIS assessments, close your open TFI browser window on your computer. That is, if you have an open assessment that's scheduled to close on or after December 7th. So if you have a TFI open that is scheduled to close on or after December 7th, just close your window on your computer, close your browser window, and then reopen it again on December 8th, and you'll be fine and ready to go. If you need more information on this, this link is available here, and that's where all the details about the updates are. All right, wrap up. Big idea for Fidelity for Tier 1, for Tier 2, for Tier 3 for this year is that we need to make sure that PBIS is being implemented with accuracy. And to make sure PBIS is being implemented with accuracy, we have to do the TFI with accuracy and hold teams accountable. We also then need to develop an action plan from the assessments that we do to guide the team in continuing to target areas for improvement. Tips for all tiers of the TFI are listed here. We have talked about this over and over. Hold teams accountable, make sure you're doing this with accuracy, and engage the team. All right, we have a survey for you to complete in order to sign out for the day. So Lisa Thomas, I believe, will be putting the survey link in the chat in there.
I just want to say, as we're getting all of that, Rachel and Becky and Amanda and Lisa, thank you so much. You worked so hard on this presentation. Rachel, always here. I think you had us the most engaged in a Zoom session that I've ever experienced in my life, and it wasn't all breakout rooms. Our network is as strong as it can be because we have all these partners to support us. As this shows, this is not a patent-only initiative, so this is our. I'm so grateful to the Center for Effective Schools for all they do for us. And make sure you do the Google form and the
survey link, or go to the survey link and access the code.
Is the code, Rachel, is awesome. Is that what the code is?
Apparently the spaces don't matter.